Okay, thank you for responding to that. Okay, so let me start over in case the audio is really bad. Today's topic is going to be about how to route wires. I try and pick topics that are pertinent to what people might be doing in their designs of Fusion 360. I also mentioned that I have my own personal channel. So if you haven't already, I recommend subscribing to that. Just do a search for Fusion 360 Brad Tallis, and you'll find my channel over there. And I do these every Tuesday and Thursday, and I try and pick on topics that are pertinent to what people are learning in Fusion 360. I share lots of tips and tricks, and today is another one of those where I'm going to show some tips and tricks on how to do wiring. And the reason I picked this was because I did that drill earlier. I already closed it, but let me go ahead and open this back up. I showed this drill in a previous live stream, and people were asking, how did you go about creating the wires in here? So if I open my browser here real quick, and my case, let me just turn this part off. You can see that I have a bunch of wires going from the switch to the motor and to the battery, etc. And people were asking, how do you create these? So I'm going to share these tips and tricks with you. Okay, so I'm going to start out simple just to kind of show the methodology, and then what we're going to do is we're actually going to route some wires from this 3D printer hot end extruder. So I might want to run some wires from the hot end through this wire clip, and then I'm going to go ahead and show how you could create, for example, a bunch of wires, and even how you could twist those wires together. So that's what I'll be showing today. So the first thing we want to do is to create the path that our wire is going to route. And you want to stay as orthographic as possible. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to start by drawing a top view. So let's pretend I have a box in here. I'm trying to route the wires through this box. So this is looking top down. This is how I want my wires to go. Okay. Now, if we look at it from the side, these are all on the same plane. There's no height or anything like that. This is just a flat spline. But what's cool is you can actually come in, click on a point, and say move. So I right click on that point, and I'm going to say move. And this actually allows us to move it in 3D. So you can kind of see as I'm looking from the top, kind of memorize what the spline looks like. You're going to notice that it's not going to change the look from the top, but now I'm going to look at it from the side. And again, I would recommend going as orthographic as possible. So now I'm looking at it from this front view, and I'm just going to drag that point up a certain distance. Okay, so it's no longer, on a flat plane. But if we look at it from the top, you'll notice that that didn't move at all. We didn't bring it down here or anything like that. We just told it to go straight up. Okay, so I could do that with other points. I could click on this point here, drag that point up, and now it still looks kind of like an S from the top, but then we've also gave it a shape from the side. Okay, I also recommend using just the arrows as much as possible. You can use these planes, but then you're moving it in two different directions. Instead of just straight up, you're also moving it to the right, okay? And that could change what your overall shape looks like. So once again, I recommend just doing one axis at a time, okay? So I'm going to back up here. I drew my top view. Then I just click on a point, right mouse click, and say move. Then I'm going to rotate to a side view, or in this case the front, and just move that point. And I can be very specific. I could say 25 if I wanted to. And we're moving it just straight up. Okay? So that's the method for creating a spline that goes through space in all three directions, X, Y, and Z. Now I want to sweep my wire or wires along that. And the second tip is I recommend creating a sketch plane on a path. Okay, and the reason for this, I'll show you. I'll go ahead and just click on this path. You can see that it's going to create a plane that's tangential to that path. Okay, and I'm going to drag it all the way here to 0. So we can kind of see it's at distance 0. If I go all the way to the end, it's going to be distance 1. It's kind of like a ratio. So if I had said 0.5, it's going to go obviously halfway along the spline. But I want that to be 0, and I'll say OK. Now the reason for that is, notice if I turn on my origin, notice the orientation of my XY plane right here. If I drew a circle, it would not be tangent with that line, and it would look weird as it got swept along. I want the circle to be perfectly tangent at that point when we start sweeping. So for example, I could come in here and say, let's create a circle. And I'll just make it maybe 5 millimeters in this case. I'll stop my sketch. We'll come in and sweep. I'll go ahead and click on my profile, and then I can select my path. And you'll see that it's going to take that circle and sweep it along that path. Now, this is a pretty simple example. We're going to create multiple wires. And so let me back up here real quick. I'm going to go ahead and edit my sketch here. And I'm going to draw, let's do a couple circles. So I'm just going to come in here and say, let's just make that 5. And I'll do another circle over here. Let's just make that 5. And I want these to be horizontal to this origin point here. And then I could specify the distance apart if I wanted to. I could throw a dimension in there, but let's just do something like this. So now I have 2 wires. I'll come in and create a sweep. I'll go ahead and select my profiles, which are these 2. Select my path, which is this one here, and you'll see that it's going to take those circles and sweep along that path. Okay. Now, what we're going to learn about here in a little bit is this twist angle is really powerful for creating like twisted wires, for example. So if I said twist 360 degrees, it's going to twist those around each other 360 degrees along that path. Okay. So I could come in here and say, you know what, let's do 3 turns. So I'm going to say 360 times 3, and now you'll see how it takes that and twists those wires along that path. Okay, so that's how we're going to get the twisted wires on our extruder here in just a moment. But that's pretty cool. Now this is another little trick that I like to use. It's not asking how many twists, it's asking for an angle. So I might want to know how many twists. So I just said go 360 degrees times 3. Or I could say times 5, and it's going to go ahead and twist 5 times as we do that. Okay. So let me show you what would happen if, let me turn on my origin here. If we didn't worry about the tangency. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe put a plane right here, for example, and create my sketch. Oops, click too fast. I'll go ahead and say create sketch. I'll draw my circle kind of near the end point there. So notice the orientation of the circle compared to the spline. If fact, I might move, let's move this point just a little bit. I'll move it down and back. So my circle is kind of like so. If I said create a sweep, what's the profile and what's the path? You'll see how it's actually did a pretty good job in this example, but sometimes you'll get, it'll like pinch or whatever as it's going along. But it's much better to get your profile basically perpendicular with the path. Another tip I like to share is when you're creating your splines, especially if you're going to twist, you want to keep your points pretty much evenly spaced. So you can see how it's much larger here than it is over here. And when you start doing your twisting, it might twist farther apart over here than it would in this section here. So if you can, it's better, and I know you can't always just because of the shape of your spline, but I would try and keep these fairly equal in size, these little segments you see here. Okay? So just shared a couple tips there. Now we're going to put it into a real world example. We're going to use that 3D printer hot end. Maybe we want to create a realistic rendering of what this thing is going to look like, and I want to show how these wires are going to be routed and maybe where they're going to be routed. So I'm going to jump over here, and we're going to route two different kinds of wires. So I'm going to come off of the hot end down here and go through this self-adhesive little zip tie clip. So I'm going to go ahead and, again, I like to work pretty much orthographically. So I'm going to start by kind of routing a side profile of where I want these wires to go. So I might actually, I'm going to start by creating a new component, and let's just call this hot end wires. So I'm creating a new component, and so all of my wires are going to go inside of there. And I'm just going to sketch maybe on this face right here. So I'm going to say create a sketch and start by drawing a spline, and I'm going to get fairly close. In fact, you'll notice it's trying to catch to edges and stuff like that. I don't really want it to in this case, but I'm going to get fairly close where I want to start. And then sort of draw the overall shape. So this is going to come up here. Now I'm going to zoom up so you can kind of see what's going on. You'll notice it's trying to catch to these object lines. And I want to control my selection here. I don't want it to select those lines. So I'm going to hold down my control key, and now you'll notice that it's not going to snap to those object lines. And when you're creating these 3D splines, I highly recommend that you don't catch to these points, because these could go back in the, for example, in this case, the Y direction really far. And we basically want to be drawing on a single plane. So I'm just going to go ahead and maybe click there. Maybe come over here a little bit. Again, you'll notice it's trying to catch to a whole bunch of edges here. I'm just going to hold down my control key, and now it's no longer catching to those edges. So I might click there, something like this, and down here somewhere. Okay. So again, if we look from the side view, this is all on one plane. Okay. And let's just end over here somewhere. I'm going to go ahead and stop my sketch. So again, all on one plane. Now obviously the wire is not where it needs to be currently, but now I'm going to go ahead and start using the move command to move some of these points. Now, what I'm showing here is an approximation. It's not going to be 100% exact. We just want to create a nice rendering of what this is going to look like. So I just wanted to get fairly close. So I'm going to click on this point and say move. Now, I can come in here and drag it around if I want to, or I could use the point-to-point command in here in the move copy window. So I'm going to say point to point. What's the origin point? So this is the origin. And what's the target point? And I'm actually going to zoom up on these little wire studs right here, and I'm just going to click on that point there. And you can see that it actually took that point that used to be on one plane and now has moved it in 3D over to this location here. So we just said go from one point to another point. Now, if we look at it from the top, we can see that the wire is kind of shooting off at a weird angle. I want it to come nicely out of this wire. So again, I'm going to click on that point, right mouse click, and say move. Now you'll notice when I do this, we get this green tangent line that appears. And if I look at it from the side, we can see it's at some weird angle. And if I look at it from the top, we can see that it's at some weird angle. Okay, so obviously we want to fix this so it's pointing straight out. So what I want to do now is click on that line, okay? And that's key, because if I had just clicked on the point, it would want to move the point. But I actually want to move the tangency line. And then I can come in and use this rotation. And again, I'm going to look at it from the side and watch what happens. I can rotate this and we can change the tangency direction of this wire coming out. Okay, and like I said, I want to get it fairly close. I want it to kind of be sort of horizontal. Because I'm in 3D, I don't have constraints such as make that horizontal. Okay, so now I'm going to look at it from the top, and let's rotate it in this direction until it's mostly horizontal, like so. Look at it from the side, it's horizontal. We look at it from the top, it's horizontal. So now that wire is pretty much coming straight out of this hot end. And I could even come in and click on the end point here and move this guy, and you can actually change the weight, like how strong of the tangency is this. So you can see as I pull this to the right, it's going to stay straighter much longer and then suddenly curve. If I push it closer to the origin point, it's going to be a much more gradual curve and not come out as far. So you can actually adjust how tight you want that to come out. So I'm going to do something like that. So now my spline is pretty much coming straight out of that hot end. Okay. So now what I want to do is kind of work on some of these other points. For example, maybe I want to pull this point, since it's sitting on that face, I might want to pull that out a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of drag this to the right. Maybe I'll do the same thing with this point over here, kind of pull that out a little bit. And here I am kind of doing it in 3D, where I said stay orthographic, but now that I'm kind of seeing what's going on here, I can visually confirm that I'm just pulling it in one direction. I can visually see what's going on here. So let's pull this guy out a little bit like so to kind of smooth out this transition. And so now maybe finally we'll pull this one pretty far away from the hot end. Okay, so looking at it from the front view, it's pretty much the exact same shape that I drew it in the front view. We started here, and I kind of went up and then through this little clip and back down again. And then we switched to the side, and we started tweaking these points. So we brought this point over, I pulled this point out to the right a little bit, I centered this one in the opening, and I finally pulled this point out to the right. Okay. Okay. So I could do the exact same thing for the other wire, but to save time, it's the exact same scenario. I would just come in and create a sketch. Yeah, say create a sketch. I could do it on this face, and obviously this time I would create a spline kind of near this point over here and sort of match. You know, I might go something like this. Maybe I cross those wires a little bit come through, and notice there I made a mistake. I actually snapped to something, and if I rotate, good. Actually, I have 3D Sketch turned off, so that's another tip I should share with you. When you're doing these kind of 3D splines, I recommend turning off 3D Sketch. Otherwise, it would have snapped back to that location that I clicked on. So I actually was lucky in that case because I have 3D Sketch turned off. Let me show you what I mean really quick. I'm going to turn that on. I'll draw another sketch. I'm just going to click somewhere. And sometimes it will snap. Nope, it didn't. Okay, it's staying on that plane. Thank goodness. Okay. Sometimes it'll snap back to those other things. So again, I recommend turning off 3D Sketch. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the sketch here. And we now have this new sketch that's all on one plane. So let me just move this guy really quick and I'll sweep both of these. So I'll do, again, point to point. I'll say that point there to this, oops, too close, to this point here. Then I might come in and move and just fix the tangency direction. Notice how it's kind of sloping down. I want to, I'm going to click on that guy there. And just a second here, I want to click on that endpoint, say move. And this is what I was talking about. So I want to select that edge or that tangency edge and then say rotate. And then I'm going to start to rotate. You can kind of see what's going on there. Now, you might ask, why are you going planar or orthographic to the screen? And the reason is if I kind of go like this, you'll see how things are kind of tilted or whatever, and it makes it a little bit harder to make those adjustments. But if I'm looking straight down, I can visually see the direction, and I know that I'm rotating in the correct direction there. So I get fairly close to horizontal, and there we go. We're good to go. Okay. Now I'm going to purposely not move any of those other points on this second wire that we just created, and I'll show you why here in just a moment. So now I have two separate paths. So I can't sweep both wires at the same time because there's two separate paths. So I'm going to come in here and do my plane along a path, which I created a shortcut right up here, but it's plane along a path. If you use this a lot, you can just hover over these little triple dots, and you could say pin to the toolbar, and it'll pin it up to the toolbar. So I'm going to go ahead and select my actually let's do the first one that we did first. I'm going to drag it all the way to 0. I'll sketch on that plane. And what's cool is my path is right at the very end. So it actually catches right to it. So I just have to get near it and say, let's just make this a 1 millimeter wire in this case. Now, like I said, I can't do both of them at the same time because there's two separate paths here. But I'll come in here and create my sweep. There's my profile, and here's my path. And it's going to give me a graphical representation of what that looks like. So we can verify that sure enough, it's coming out, it's going up, it's going through this little zip tie clip, and then coming down here. I'll say okay, and there we go. Okay. I see a lot of comments. Hopefully this is all making sense. Aaron, thank you for hanging out with me and answering all of these questions for me. I appreciate it. So now what I'm going to do is the exact same thing on this other wire. I'll create a plane along a path and drag it back like so. Create a sketch on there and draw my circle. Now this is the one where I didn't move any of the points. And we're going to see something interesting here when I create my sweep, I'm going to say create a sweep. Here's my profile, and here's my path. I'm just going to go ahead and say OK. And it looks like it turned out pretty good. It created that wire. Now, something I typically do, and this is just my anal retentiveness, I sometimes come under inspect and I want to know, are these wires interfering with each other? So I could come in here and say interference, and I could select one of those wires and the second wire. So we've selected 2 wires, and I want to compute, and luckily there's no interferences. Okay, so these 2 wires are actually not touching each other as they're being swept through here. So I actually was pretty lucky. Okay, typically they intersect each other. Now here's what I think is so cool. I can come in here and let's expand open our wires, expand open our bodies. We can see the 2 separate wires right here. And I can also expand open our sketches. So let's turn off body 2 and let's turn on the sketch for that. And I'm just going to come in here and move that point. So let's pull it maybe out this way a little bit, like so. And watch what happens. I'll turn the body back on. So here's where it was. I just moved that point, and when I say OK, it actually updates those wires for me. And this is, I think, really kind of cool because I can come in and move these points. I'm going to say move. I'm just going to pull that out a little bit like so. Make sure I'm grabbing the wire. Yeah, so here you can see why I sometimes turn off the body. So I want to grab that point and move it. And let me make sure. Yeah, there we go. I must not have been grabbing the right point. Oh, it's because, aha. So here is exactly what I was talking about. I'll be the first to admit, I make mistakes. And remember earlier I said, hold down the control key so it's not snapping to those objects in the background. And I said, because sometimes that can burn you. I just got burned. It's actually snapping to an object line. So that's why it's not letting me pull that line out. I can move it up and down and stuff, but it's basically snapped to that line. So again, that's the reason why I say hold down your control key so it doesn't automatically snap. So I'm going to grab, just to speed things up, I could unassociate that, but I'm going to move this guy over. I just want to do something kind of like this, where if they were accidentally going through each other, I'll turn the body back on. So now I'll do my inspect, interference. I'll pick one wire, I'll pick the other wire, I'll compute, and it actually shows me, okay, some of these wires are intersecting, and if you zoom up, I can actually see, it's kind of hard to see because it's colored red right here, but it actually shows where these parts are intersecting. So, and this happens a lot when you're routing wires. They might overlap each other. So the easiest thing to do is just to come in and pull one of those paths, one of those sketches. So move, kind of look at it from the side. Let's move that over a little bit. That looks pretty good. Move it over this way. Maybe that looks pretty good. I'll say OK. And now my wires aren't intersecting each other anymore. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to actually creating multiple wires and actually plugging them into a plug. So I'm going to go ahead and activate my top level component here. Oh, you know what? Just for fun, let's go ahead and color these wires just so they look a little bit different. So I'm going to hit A on my keyboard for appearance. So A brings up the appearance window. And I'm just going to come in here under plastic. So I'm going to expand open plastic because the wire's made typically out of plastic. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. And there's one called, there's opaque, there's textured, there's translucent. I'm going to come in here and go into translucent. And let's do maybe a red wire. So I'm just going to drag the red over onto that guy. And then maybe I want to do a black wire, but you'll notice that there's no black in here. So maybe I'll just grab this white and drag it on there. But then I can right click and say edit. And this allows me to pick the color. So I could come down here and drag that to black. And maybe we'll just rename this to black. So makes it a little bit more realistic, showing the actual colored wire. So now we can see the red and black wire. Okay. I see Aaron is very busy answering questions, so hopefully this is all making sense. So let's take it to the next level. Now we're going to route the wires from this plug. I want them to come through this zip tie clip and then just off to the side. Now I have this plug in here that goes in, fits over these pins or whatever. So I'm just going to basically make my wires come into this particular plug. So I'm going to start by creating a new component. And let's just call this stepper wires or something like that. So now I have a new component called stepper wires. I'm going to start with an offset plane off the top of this plug. And this will make more sense the farther we go, but I'm just going to come up here. Probably, it looks like around 15 looks pretty good. So I'm going to just offset this plane about 15 millimeters. Okay. Then I'll sketch on here, and I'm going to draw my wire bundle. So I'll just come in here and maybe draw a circle. We'll make them 1 millimeter in diameter for the wires. And I'll create a circular pattern. Again, this will make more sense as we get farther along. And I need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I need to do 6 wires in this bundle. So I just turn that up to 6. I'll say OK. And maybe I want to bring these wires closer together. And I love this with the pattern command. I can just move one of these and they all move. So I'm just going to move this a little bit closer, like so. And say stop my sketch. So I basically created a little bundle of wires right here. The next thing I want to do is to bring them down into each of these individual ports. Now to simplify things, I want them to go into the center of these holes right here. So I want to create a plane that slices right through the center of these holes. And I think one of the easiest ways of doing this is to use the construction menu and use axis through a cylinder. And I'm just going to click on one of these. It doesn't matter which one I click on. And it's kind of hard to see, but it just took an axis line and put it straight through there. So I'll say OK. And I now have this axis line, which now allows me to say plane at an angle. And notice it's asking for a line. So I can click on this line and you'll see that it puts a plane slicing through that line. Well, I want it to go this way, so I'm going to rotate it exactly 90 degrees. And now we can see that that plane is slicing through those holes. I'll go ahead and make this a little bit larger. Hopefully you know that trick. If you drag the corner of a construction plane, it allows you to resize it. Okay, so now we can visually see that sure enough this plane is slicing right through it. And I'm going to go ahead and sketch on that plane. Okay. I'm going to project some geometry. So under Create, Project, you'll notice the P key is the shortcut key, which I always use the shortcut keys. So I'm out here, I just hit the P key, and it's going to project some geometry. So I just want to click on these holes here, And I'll zoom in so you can kind of see what's going on, but it basically projected, when I say okay, it projected these lines for me. And now I can use those lines to catch to. So I'm going to create some kind of free-form shapes here, and I think spline. Let me go ahead and click on that guy there. And all I have to do is get near this edge, and you'll see how it snaps automatically to the center. And I think this is really slick. It's like an automatic thing here. I'm going to go ahead and click. And looking at it from the side, I'm just basically going to click one point and then maybe another point up here somewhere. Okay, so pretty basic spline. In fact, I'm going to do this multiple times. Get near the center, click, and click. And right now it doesn't matter what the shape of my spline is, where it ends, or anything like that. I'm just basically kind of representing the wires per se. So just something like this. I'll say like that. And one more. I'll go up a little bit further that time. Okay, so I just graphically quickly created these splines, and again, they are all on one plane. Okay, we can kind of see that. And I want to be very specific. I want these wires to go straight down into these holes. And we can control that using this green tangency line. So you'll notice I can change the angle and I can change the weight of the tangency. So here's a neat little trick. I can click on that green line and say I want that to be vertical. And you'll notice it instantly snaps to being vertical. Where these are kind of at an angle, this is now saying that spline has to come straight out of the hole and then start to curve. So I'm just going to do that on all of these. I'm going to say I want all of these tangency directions to be vertical. So I just click on them, and we can see that we've now forced those to be vertical. And again, if I drag this, I can change the weight of that tangency. So you can kind of see how dragging that up makes it go straighter, much longer, and then finally curve. So you can kind of come in here and tweak on some of these, you know, to make the curves just a little bit more straight out. Okay. And so there's my wires going nice and straight into my plug. Well, now I want to connect these guys to my wire bundle up here. So again, I'm going to click on a point, and I want these to be vertical before I connect. And I'm going to emphasize this. There is some steps and some order that you have to do here, and I'll purposely make a mistake to show you what would happen if you didn't do it in the right order. So as you practice this, as you play around with it, you know, just make sure you kind of follow these steps. And I will upload the assembly here so you can play around with this on your own time. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that green arrow, and notice I can add a constraint. So I'm going to say make that vertical, and you'll see, sure enough, it forced that tangency to be vertical. Now the reason it let me do this is because I'm on the sketch plane. It's allowing me to do constraints. But watch this. I'm going to purposely make a mistake here. This one is not straight up and down. I'm going to right mouse click and say move. And I want to move 2 points. So I'm going to go from this point here to that point there. And sure enough, it took my spline and it moved that endpoint up there. It looks great, but you'll notice that the line does not come straight down. So you're like, okay, just add a constraint. Well, when I click on it now, here's my line. But if I click on vertical, you'll notice it doesn't do anything. And that's because this is now in 3D. So it doesn't know which direction or anything like that. So you want to basically, before you move these points off of the plane, you'll want to force all of the endpoints to be vertical. So I'm going to click on that guy, say vertical. I'll click on this one and that guy, that one, and finally that one. So now we've basically said we want all of our splines to be tangent or straight up and down at the very end. Now when I come in and say move, I can move 2 points from that point there to that point there, and it's still nice and vertical. And this is really key. We're spending a little bit of time making sure everything is tangent or constrained, like vertical, for example, because if we didn't, you know, and my wire kind of ended up at an angle and my spline came up at a point, it would look kind of kinked and it just wouldn't look all that great. And we want to try and make this look as nice as possible. Okay, so quickly, I'm just going to basically connect the dots. So I'm going to use my move command. I'm going to say, let's move that point there from point to point. So I'll say that point to this point. And notice it actually moved that wire back. Let me take a look at it from the side here. You can see how it went up and then to the back right here. So now we're giving it kind of that 3D look. So I'm just going to do that really fast on these other ones. So we'll say maybe this point here goes from here to here. I'm just catching to those endpoints. Let's say this wire here goes from that guy to that back point there. And I'm just repeating my last command by dragging straight up with my right mouse click. And I'll say, let's go from here to here. I must have clicked the wrong point. Just let me see. Oh yeah, I clicked the tangency point instead of the actual end point. So you do have to be a little bit careful. So I'm going to say I want to go from that point to that point. That's better. And then the last one here, same thing. I'm going to say that endpoint goes from there to there. Okay, so now if we look at this, I'm going to stop my sketch. We have all of these wires coming down. They all end up in a nice straight line, but you can see how they're all coming up to an individual wire endpoint up here. Pretty slick, I think. Okay, so let's go ahead and sweep these. So I'll say sweep. What's my, and again, I have to do these unfortunately individually because all the paths are different. So I'm just going to select my profile and then my path. I'll say okay. Now my sketch went away, but all I have to do is expand open my stepper wires and turn on those 2 sketches. And I can do the same thing. I'm just going to come in here and say sweep that guy. Sweeps on that path there. Now, I'm hoping something will happen here, but it actually looks like our splines are pretty good. So we might not run into the problem I was thinking about. But if you go ahead and select a path, and instead of new body, it actually says cut and it turns red, that means that some of your profiles are intersecting, and you would just have to move your profile slightly, like I've already shown. Let me go ahead and I'll do this guy here and select my path. I'm going to purposely make a mistake here so you can see what I was talking about. So I'm just going to move this guy over like so. Okay, so then I'm going to come in and sweep. Here's my profile, here's my path, and this is what I was talking about. So you can see how it's red, and the reason for this is because it's intersecting another body, so it thinks that you want to cut that away. So this is a really graphical representation that I need to change my spline. Okay, so I would move my spline, but I'm just going to undo in that case. So sweep. path. Okay, so there's my wires. Now, just like I showed before, I could come in, let's expand our bodies, and I could even rename these if I wanted to. But I could see, for example, body 4. Let's turn that guy off, and I want to move that point. So I'm going to look at it kind of orthographically. Let's just move it up a little bit, like so. And then we can turn that guy back on, and you can see how I smoothed. It wasn't such a tight kink or whatever. So you have the flexibility to edit those. Okay, now I want to route my bundle down through this clip. Okay, so basically I want to sweep all of these along a path, but I don't have that path created yet. And in this case, I'm probably going to draw it from this side view to come down through the clip. So again, I need to have a sketch plane, and I want it to go right through the center of all of these circles. And you'll notice there's a point right there. So I'm going to come in and say axis perpendicular to face. Let's see if that one's going to work. There's the face, and there's the point. So there you can see, sure enough, it's perpendicular to this face, and it's going right through that point. And this point is basically representing the center of my pattern. So let me do that again. I went under Construct, Axis perpendicular to face at a point. Okay? So I'm going to say one of these faces, it doesn't matter which one. There's my face. Now it's asking for a point, so I'm going to click there. And then that's going to allow me to say plane at an angle. So I'll click on that guy there. And again, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, like so. So this plane is slicing exactly through the center of my wire bundle there. And I can sketch on that plane. So just like before, I'm going to catch to that point there and maybe just kind of draw overall shape. Come like here, looking at it kind of from the side view. I want to make sure I kind of go right through the center here, like so. Maybe we come out the bottom a little bit, and then I want to end up somewhere over here. Okay, so again, just kind of a basic shape. And now I might come back and just drag some of these points around. Maybe I lift this point up a little bit, bring him over. Okay, then I'm going to come in and I want to fix the tangency directions of this. So let me go ahead and click on that spline, and we can see here's my tangency for that endpoint. So I'm going to click on it and force that to be vertical. And now we can see that my spline is definitely coming straight up and out. Okay, so that's good. I'll look at it from the side again, and maybe as I look at this, these are a little bit too kind of close together, so I might pull these up a little bit more, have the wire come up and over. Again, I have a lot of control on what I want this to look like. Same thing here, I want this to kind of come straight down. And now let's take a look at it from the side, and we can see that obviously we're way off, okay? But now I can start moving some of these points. So let's look at it from the side. I'll grab that point there. And I usually do the more major points. So like this one I know has to go through here. So I'm going to drag that to the left. And you can see it's kind of creating a major curve. So I might come in and say, okay, let's move that point to the left a little bit. That's going to kind of help smooth things out. So I can grab these. And I grabbed the wrong one there. Want to make sure I'm grabbing the right point. Drag that guy to the left. So now you can kind of see we're starting to improve what the shape of this spline is looking like. So it's coming straight down through this clip. And again, notice how I'm using just pretty much a single arrow to define, you know, the direction I want these to go. So let's just maybe, I'll come over here. And let's take a look up here. So these are kind of coming straight up. So maybe I'll pull this one over slightly. Maybe something like that, just to kind of make a nice smooth transition. So I've said this multiple times now, but the same, it doesn't look any different here. It's the same shape that I drew because I'm only moving in one direction at a time. So I drew my basic path, then I came over here and I tweaked with that path, moving those points just to the left. And that's the important part. Okay, so I'm going to stop my sketch. We'll create our sweep. And you know what? I haven't saved this recently, so I'm going to go ahead and save. And I'm just going to say added wire harness or something like that. Okay. So I'm going to come in here and create a sweep. What's the profile? I'm actually going to grab all of these shapes here. And again, because this was drawn on a plane and I made sure that this was vertical, all of these are lined up. They're basically tangent with each other. So what's my path? This is my path. And it's going to take the ends of these wires basically and sweep them along that path. Now I can visually see I need to change some stuff here, and that's what's so cool about this. So in this example, it's kind of curving out from this clip. So I'll say okay. It'll go ahead and accept that sweep for me. Now, this is pretty complicated. There's a lot of curves, a lot of edges going on here, so you can see that it's actually going to take some time to calculate. And again, another tip is I personally recommend getting your shapes, getting your spline shapes set pretty close to where you want it to be before you do the actual sweep, especially when you start twisting your sweep, etc. So we want to get it as close as we can. So I'm going to come in here and let's turn off those bodies. So I'm just going to turn off the body there and let's turn on our sketch. And maybe we pull this point down a little bit. So I'm just going to move, again, looking straight on. I'm just going to pull that point down, and you can see how it kind of smooths out that transition there. And maybe I pull it in to the left a little bit. So, okay, it's thinking as it's doing that, because it's actually updating the sweep in the background. So again, this is why I recommend making sure everything is correct before you make some changes like that. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay. And it's actually, you can see it's actually updating the sweep, even though we can't see the bodies, but I'll go ahead and turn those bodies back on. And we just moved this point down and to the left a little bit, and that should help smooth out the transition. Okay. So I just glanced at the chat window really quick. Somebody said, why would you route your cables through the cable clip? I totally agree. I was just trying to find something that I could route through. Obviously, you would clip to them. What I was wanting to show here is how you can very precisely guide your wires like through holes or through openings and stuff like that. So again, this is not as realistic as it should be, but I didn't have a wire clip. So great observation. So thank you. Okay, let me turn my bodies back on, and we can see, sure enough, I fixed that. Okay, so this looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and twist these now. So let's go ahead and re-edit my sweep. And I think it's doing an autosave. I want to do my twist angle. Now 360 degrees is just one twist. I'm going to go more than that. So I'm just going to say 1,000 degrees. So that's a multiple twists there. So now again, it's going to take some time to do this. So bear with it as it thinks. So again, do this only when necessary. And I'm trying to do this for a realistic looking render. I want to show like these wires are twisted together. So that's why I'm using the twist. If you're just trying to show, routing channels, hey, the wire's going to go over here. You would just basically, I need to type in an extra 0 here. You would just, kind of show the route of where that wire is going to go. So good observation there. Okay, so now let me switch back. There we go. It's thinking really hard. So as it twists these cables around. So I'm going to break out of it because I don't want to waste you guys' time because we are almost at the top of the hour, but it will eventually twist all of those wires. So with that, let me take a look at the chat window really quick. Appreciate all the comments. Again, at the very beginning, I know there were some audio issues. I apologize for that. I need to maybe get a better mic. Please subscribe to these. We try and share as many topics as we can on things that are useful for you. Also, I mentioned I have my own personal channel that is, if you do a search on YouTube for Fusion 360 Brad Tallis, you'll find it out there. Recommend subscribing for those. Share your comments, share your ideas. I need to scroll through after this and see all the questions that were coming up. I actually learn a lot from you guys. So one of my upcoming live streams, I'm going to share what have I learned from you. So I think this is great that you guys are attending these. Let me share my screen one last time here. You'll see that sure enough, it twisted those wires. And then I would just come in kind of like what I did with the black and the red, is I can now add in some colors to these wires and they look great when they're twisted. So with that, I want to thank everybody. I'm not going to color them because you know how to do that. I want to thank everybody for your attendance. Hope to see you on a future live stream, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.